The flight that changed everything. The airport buzzed with its usual cacophony of voices, rolling luggage, and overhead announcements. Among the crowd, Sergeant Alex Carter, a decorated black soldier in his early 30s, walked briskly to his gate. His crisp military uniform drew curious glances, some filled with admiration, others with indifference. Alex had just completed an arduous 15-month deployment overseas. Home awaited, a small townhouse where his wife, Leah, and his 7-year-old son, Eli, had spent sleepless nights praying for his safe return. As he approached the boarding gate, Alex's mind replayed the voicemail Leah had left him the night before. "Eli's been counting down the hours, Alex." Leah's voice trembled with emotion. He even made a sign. "Welcome home, Daddy. I can't wait for you to see it." Alex smiled faintly. He was exhausted but eager to embrace the family he had fought so hard for. At the same time, Marilyn Foster, a blonde woman in her late 40s with an air of entitlement, strode confidently through the airport, her designer handbag swinging at her side. Marilyn loved first-class travel. To her, it wasn't just about comfort, it was a status symbol. She believed certain spaces were reserved for people like her, sophisticated, successful, and most importantly, deserving. When Marilyn boarded the plane and saw her seat, a plush window spot in the exclusive first-class cabin, she sighed with satisfaction. She set her purse on the adjacent seat, pleased to have an empty spot next to her. The flight attendants scurried to accommodate her every whim as she ordered a glass of Chardonnay before takeoff. But Marilyn's contentment evaporated when Alex entered the first-class cabin, ticket in hand. His assigned seat was next to her. The soldier nodded politely and began to stow his duffel bag. But as Alex moved to sit down, Marilyn's face contorted with disgust. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the low hum of passengers settling in. "There must be some mistake. Is he supposed to be here?" The flight attendant nearest to her paused mid-stride. "Ma'am, is there an issue?" "Yes, there's an issue," Marilyn exclaimed, loud enough for the cabin to hear. She gestured at Alex, her manicured nails glinting under the overhead light. "I paid for first class. I shouldn't have to sit next to this." The cabin fell silent. Heads turned toward the commotion, passengers craning their necks to see what was happening. Alex stood frozen, his jaw tightening, though his expression remained calm. He had faced prejudice before, but the sting of public humiliation never dulled. The flight attendant blinked, momentarily stunned. "Ma'am, Sergeant Carter is a paying first-class passenger, just like you." Marilyn scoffed. "I don't care what his title is. People like him should sit in the back where they belong." A gasp rippled through the cabin. Alex didn't flinch, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his hurt. He locked eyes with the flight attendant and spoke softly. "It's all right. I can move." Before he could step away, a voice interrupted. "No, you won't." The words came from a silver-haired man in a tailored suit seated across the aisle. William Bill Henderson, a retired judge, stood up with a commanding presence. His deep, steady voice carried weight as he addressed Marilyn. "You're the one who doesn't belong here." Marilyn's face reddened. "Who do you think you are to talk to me like that?" Bill crossed his arms. "Someone who won't tolerate bigotry. Sergeant Carter earned his place here, just like you or me. If you can't accept that, perhaps you should find another flight." At that moment, the plane's captain, alerted by the escalating situation, emerged from the cockpit. His stern gaze landed on Marilyn. "Ma'am, your behavior is unacceptable. Security has been notified, and you will not be flying with us today." Marilyn's indignation morphed into disbelief. "You can't do that. I have rights." The captain's tone left no room for argument, and so does every passenger on this plane. Security is on their way. Minutes later, 2 airport security officers escorted Marilyn off the plane as passengers erupted into applause. Alex, however, remained silent, sinking into his seat. He appreciated the support but felt conflicted. This wasn't the kind of attention he sought. The flight attendant approached him hesitantly. "Sergeant Carter, I'm so sorry for what happened." "It's fine," Alex said, forcing a small smile. "Let's just get everyone home safely." As the plane prepared for takeoff, whispers circulated throughout the cabin. Many passengers discreetly glanced at Alex, their expressions ranging from sympathy to admiration. But Alex remained focused on the small screen in front of him, trying to block out the noise. Little did he know, a fellow passenger had captured the entire confrontation on video. By the time the plane landed, the footage would ignite a firestorm that neither Alex nor Marilyn could have anticipated. The aftermath takes flight. The plane landed smoothly at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, but for Sergeant Alex Carter, the turbulence wasn't over. As the passengers disembarked, many stopped by his seat to thank him for his service or offer words of support. Alex nodded politely, overwhelmed by the attention. By the time Alex stepped into the terminal, he only had one thing on his mind: his family. He scanned the crowd until he spotted his wife Leah holding a sign that read, "Welcome home, Daddy." Next to her stood Eli, bouncing on his toes with excitement. "Daddy!" Eli shrieked, sprinting toward Alex. Alex dropped his duffel bag and scooped his son into his arms, hugging him tightly. Leah joined them moments later, her eyes glistening with tears. "You're finally home," she whispered, her voice cracking. Alex kissed her forehead. "I missed you so much." For a moment, the world faded away, and Alex felt nothing but gratitude. But as they walked toward baggage claim, Alex's phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again. "Your phone's blowing up," Leah said, frowning. "Everything okay?" Alex glanced at the screen and froze. Notifications poured in: text messages, emails, social media alerts. He opened one of the texts from a fellow soldier. "Bro, you're trending. What happened on that flight?" Confused, Alex opened the link included in the message. His heart sank as he watched the now viral video of Marilyn berating him on the plane. The footage captured every word, every insult, and every moment of her humiliation as she was escorted off the aircraft. "Oh no," Alex muttered. Leah peered over his shoulder, her face darkening as she watched the clip. "Who filmed this?" "I don't know," Alex said, his voice heavy. "But it's everywhere now." The video had already racked up millions of views and sparked a firestorm online. Hashtags like #SergeantCarter, #JusticeForAlex, and #FirstClassRespect were trending, alongside memes ridiculing Marilyn, whom the internet had swiftly dubbed Airplane Karen. "I just wanted to come home quietly," Alex sighed, rubbing his temples. "I didn't want all this noise." Leah placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You didn't ask for this, Alex, but maybe it's a good thing. People are standing up for you." He nodded, though his expression remained somber. "Let's just get home." Meanwhile, across town, in her luxury apartment, Marilyn Foster paced the floor, gripping her phone. She had spent hours trying to contain the fallout, but it was too late. Her name, face, and actions were plastered across every major news outlet and social media platform. The comment sections were brutal. "Racist behavior has no place in 2024. She's exactly what's wrong with this country. Anyone know where she works? Companies need to know who they're hiring." Marilyn slammed her phone onto the counter and poured herself another glass of wine. Her attempts to spin the narrative had backfired spectacularly. She had written a post claiming she was the victim of cancel culture, but the backlash only intensified. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her boss. "Marilyn," he said curtly, "we've reviewed the footage, and this is unacceptable. We have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately." "What?" Marilyn shrieked. "You can't fire me. I've been with the company for..." Her boss cut her off. "This isn't up for debate. Goodbye." The call ended, leaving Marilyn in stunned silence. She stared at the wall, her world crumbling around her. She was no longer just Marilyn Foster. She was a national pariah. Back at Alex's home. That evening, Alex sat on the couch with Leah, his laptop balanced on his knees. News outlets had picked up the story, and reporters were trying to reach him for a comment. Despite his reluctance to engage, Alex decided to watch one of the segments. The screen displayed a montage of the plane incident, followed by interviews with passengers who had witnessed the confrontation. One woman, a schoolteacher named Evelyn Perez, spoke tearfully about how the moment had inspired her. "That man showed such dignity," Evelyn said. "He didn't retaliate, didn't stoop to her level. We could all learn something from him." Leah squeezed Alex's hand. "They're right, you know. You handled it better than most people could." Before Alex could respond, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a direct message from a prominent journalist at a national news network. "Sergeant Carter, we'd like to invite you to share your story on our morning show. The world needs to hear your voice." Alex stared at the message, conflicted. He had joined the military to serve, not to become a public figure. But Leah's voice broke through his thoughts. "You should do it," she said softly. "People are listening now. This could be your chance to change the conversation." Marilyn's day of reckoning. As the sun rose the next morning, Marilyn groggily checked her phone, hoping for some reprieve. Instead, she was greeted with headlines that made her stomach churn. Airline passengers' racist outburst sparks outrage. Decorated soldier faces discrimination on first-class flight. She opened social media, scrolling past countless posts condemning her actions. One comment stopped her cold. Her grandfather must be rolling in his grave. Didn't he serve in World War II? Shameful. Marilyn's brow furrowed. Her grandfather. She had never thought much about him. Her family rarely discussed their past. But the comment lingered, planting a seed of curiosity. She pulled out an old family photo album and flipped through the pages until she found a faded picture of a man in uniform. Her grandfather, Charles Foster, had indeed served in World War I. Marilyn frowned, wondering what he would think of her actions. The tipping point. By the time Alex appeared on the morning show 2 days later, the story had reached global audiences. Sitting across from the journalist, Alex spoke with the same calm composure he had displayed on the plane. "I'm not here to attack anyone," he said, his voice steady. "I just want people to treat each other with respect. That's all I ever wanted." The journalist leaned forward. "What do you hope comes out of this?" Alex paused, choosing his words carefully. "I hope we can learn from it. We all have a responsibility to do better, for ourselves and for the next generation." The interview went viral, with viewers praising Alex for his humility and grace. But as Alex returned home, another notification popped up on his phone. A direct message from Marilyn herself. "Sergeant Carter, I owe you an apology. Would you be willing to meet?" An unlikely encounter. Alex Carter sat at the edge of his couch, the faint hum of the television filling the room. The message from Marilyn Foster glowed on his phone screen. The words felt heavy. "Sergeant Carter, I owe you an apology. Would you be willing to meet?" He read it again, trying to parse her intentions. Was this genuine remorse, or another attempt to control the narrative? Leah walked into the room, drying her hands on a towel. She noticed his furrowed brow. "What's wrong?" Alex turned the phone toward her. Leah's eyes scanned the message, and her expression darkened. "She has some nerve reaching out to you after what she did. I don't know what to think," Alex admitted, leaning back into the couch. "Part of me wants to hear her out, but the other part, I don't know if I'm ready." Leah sat down beside him. "You've always been the bigger person, Alex, but this is different. She humiliated you in front of a plane full of people, and now the whole world knows. Do you really owe her anything?" Alex sighed. "It's not about owing her. Maybe this is a chance to make her understand." Leah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "If you decide to meet her, just promise me one thing. Protect your peace. Don't let her drag you down." Across town, Marilyn's struggle. Marilyn stared at the message she had sent Alex, her fingers trembling as they hovered over her phone. She hadn't expected to feel this much anxiety over something as simple as an apology, but the truth was, she had no idea what to say if he agreed to meet. Her life had unraveled in the days since the video went viral. She had lost her job, her reputation, and even her closest friends. She was now a cautionary tale, a face attached to everything wrong with entitlement and prejudice. But it wasn't just the backlash that gnawed at her. It was something deeper. As she sifted through old family photographs earlier that day, she had found a letter written by her grandfather, Charles Foster, a decorated World War I veteran. The letter was dated July 1945, addressed to her grandmother, and described Charles' experience fighting alongside black soldiers in the segregated army. One line stood out. "These men have shown me courage and loyalty I could only hope to match. History might not remember them, but I will." Marilyn felt a lump in her throat as she read the words again. Her grandfather had revered these men, and yet she had demeaned one of their descendants in the worst way. She couldn't reconcile the image of her grandfather with the person she had become. The decision to meet. Alex eventually responded to Marilyn's message. His reply was measured. "I'll meet with you, but only if it's in a public place. I'll bring someone with me." The next morning, they arranged to meet at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Alex chose the location carefully, wanting a space where he could stay in control of the conversation. Leah insisted on coming along, sitting a few tables away to give him space, but also to ensure he wasn't blindsided. Marilyn arrived first, her once confident demeanor replaced by visible unease. Her makeup was minimal, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She wore a plain blouse and jeans, a stark contrast to the polished, designer-clad image the internet had seen. When Alex entered, Marilyn stood awkwardly, her eyes darting between him and Leah, who took her seat nearby. Alex extended a hand, his expression unreadable. Marilyn hesitated but shook it. "Thank you for meeting me," Marilyn said, her voice low. Alex nodded but didn't sit down immediately. "Let's make one thing clear. I'm not here to make you feel better. If you have something to say, say it." Marilyn's face flushed. She gestured to the chair opposite her, and Alex finally sat down. I'm sorry," she began, stumbling over the words. "I'm sorry for what I said, for how I treated you. It was wrong, and there's no excuse." Alex leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Do you understand why it was wrong, or are you just apologizing because people are angry?" The question hit Marilyn like a slap. She fidgeted with her hands, struggling to articulate her thoughts. "I didn't think about it in the moment. I've been so used to seeing the world a certain way. I thought first class was for people like me. And God, that sounds awful when I say it out loud." "It is awful," Alex said bluntly. "But it's the truth, isn't it? You thought I didn't belong there." Marilyn nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I've spent the last few days learning about my grandfather, about the men he served with. He fought alongside black soldiers, men he respected, admired. And yet here I am, disrespecting everything he stood for." Alex's expression softened, but only slightly. "And what do you plan to do about it?" Marilyn blinked. "What? You said you're sorry. That's the easy part. What happens next? What are you going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again?" Marilyn bit her lip, realizing she hadn't thought that far ahead. I want to learn, to educate myself, and maybe I can use this experience to help others do the same." Alex nodded slowly. "That's a start. A turning point." Their conversation lasted over an hour. Marilyn spoke candidly about her upbringing, her privilege, and the blind spots she had ignored for so long. Alex listened, offering occasional responses, but mostly letting her confront her own ignorance. As they prepared to leave, Marilyn asked one final question. "Do you think people will ever forgive me?" Alex stood, meeting her gaze. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for. It's something you earn." Start by doing the work. The rest will follow. Marilyn nodded, understanding the weight of his words. The ripple effect. Over the following weeks, Marilyn began volunteering with organizations focused on racial equity and veterans advocacy. She started sharing her story publicly, not as a defense but as a cautionary tale. Her humility and willingness to learn began to shift public perception, though forgiveness was slow and not guaranteed. Alex, meanwhile, found himself at the center of a broader conversation about respect, service, and inclusion. He was invited to speak at schools, community centers, and even corporate events, sharing his experiences and emphasizing the importance of treating everyone with dignity. One day, a package arrived at Alex's home. Inside was a framed photograph of Marilyn's grandfather, Charles Foster, standing alongside black soldiers during World War I. There was also a handwritten note from Marilyn. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be better. I hope this reminds you, and me, that the fight for equality didn't start with us, and it won't end with us." Marilyn. Alex placed the photograph on his mantel, next to his own military memorabilia. It was a reminder that even in the face of ignorance, change was possible, but only if people were willing to confront the truth and do the work. A story beyond the skies. Weeks turned into months, and the viral incident on the plane had evolved from a moment of outrage to a national conversation. Sergeant Alex Carter found himself reluctantly stepping into the spotlight, a role he never sought but one he felt obligated to fulfill. His story had become a symbol of resilience, humility, and the importance of confronting prejudice head-on. As Alex balanced his growing public role with his duties as a husband and father, he received an unexpected invitation. The local university wanted him to speak at their annual Veterans Honor Day event. It wasn't just about his military service. They wanted him to address the incident on the plane and the broader issues of racial equity in America. Leah encouraged him to accept. "You have a chance to inspire people, Alex. Not just veterans, but everyone." Reluctantly, Alex agreed, though he felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. A different kind of audience. The university auditorium was packed when Alex arrived. Students, faculty, and local residents filled the seats, their faces a mix of curiosity and admiration. The stage was adorned with American flags and photographs of local veterans, including a few black soldiers whose contributions had often gone unacknowledged. As Alex took the stage, a hush fell over the room. He adjusted the microphone, his gaze scanning the crowd. "Thank you for having me," he began, his voice steady. "When I first stepped onto that plane a few months ago, all I wanted was to get home to my family. I didn't expect to become the center of a national conversation." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But what happened on that plane wasn't just about me. It was about something much bigger. It was about the assumptions we make about each other, the biases we carry, and the ways those biases can harm people, whether we realize it or not." Alex spoke about his journey in the military, the camaraderie he had experienced with soldiers from all backgrounds, and the challenges of serving in a system that hadn't always treated everyone equally. He also addressed the incident with Marilyn Foster, framing it as a teachable moment for the nation. "Marilyn Foster didn't just insult me," he said. "She insulted the legacy of every soldier who has fought for this country, regardless of the color of their skin. But here's the thing. She's trying to do better. And that's what I want to focus on, not the mistakes we've made, but the steps we take to correct them." The audience erupted in applause, many rising to their feet. Marilyn's journey. Meanwhile, Marilyn Foster had been making strides of her own. She had joined a nonprofit organization that focused on educating communities about the contributions of marginalized groups in American history. She had also started speaking at events, sharing her story as a cautionary tale. But despite her efforts, Marilyn still faced significant backlash. Her social media accounts were a battleground of support and vitriol. For every comment praising her transformation, there were 3 more accusing her of insincerity. One night, as she prepared to attend another event, Marilyn received an email from a college student named Jordan Hall. It read, "Ms. Foster, I wanted to thank you for sharing your story. I'm a black student at a predominantly white university, and I've dealt with people who think like you did before the plane incident. Your willingness to change gives me hope. I hope others can learn from you too." Marilyn reread the email several times, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, she felt like her efforts might be making a difference. The documentary project. While Alex and Marilyn navigated their respective paths, a new development brought them together once again. A prominent filmmaker, Cynthia Torres, approached both of them with a proposal to create a documentary about the incident and its aftermath. The film would delve into the broader themes of racial bias, military service, and the power of redemption. Cynthia had explained her vision during a meeting with Alex and Marilyn. "This isn't just about what happened on that plane. It's about the history behind it, the progress we've made, and the work we still need to do." Alex was hesitant. "I'm not sure I want to relive all of this." Cynthia nodded. "I understand. But your story has already inspired so many people. Imagine the impact this documentary could have." Marilyn, too, had reservations. "What if people think I'm just trying to save face?" Cynthia smiled gently. "If you approach this with honesty, people will see your sincerity. And even if they don't, the story itself will stand on its own." After much deliberation, both Alex and Marilyn agreed to participate. Uncovering hidden histories. As the documentary team began their research, they uncovered a trove of stories about black soldiers who had faced discrimination both during and after their service. One story, in particular, stood out. Sergeant Henry Lawson, a black World War I veteran who had been denied a Medal of Honor for his bravery because of his race. The filmmakers decided to weave Henry's story into the documentary, connecting it to Alex's experiences and the broader themes of inequality. They tracked down Henry's daughter, Ruth Lawson, who still had her father's war diary. The diary detailed Henry's heroism, including a mission where he had saved dozens of lives under enemy fire. When Alex read excerpts from the diary, he felt a deep connection to Henry's story. "This is why I agreed to do this," he told Cynthia. "People like Henry deserve to be remembered." The documentary premiere. Months later, the documentary, titled Beyond the Skies, premiered at a packed theater. Alex, Leah, Marilyn, and Ruth sat together in the front row, their nerves palpable as the lights dimmed. The film was a powerful blend of historical accounts, interviews, and raw footage of Alex and Marilyn's journeys. It didn't shy away from uncomfortable truths, but also offered a message of hope and progress. When the credits rolled, the audience gave a standing ovation. Many were visibly moved, some wiping away tears. During the post-screening Q&A, a young woman in the audience stood up. "Sergeant Carter, Ms. Foster," she began, her voice trembling. "Thank you for sharing your story. It's given me hope that people can change, that we can all change." Alex nodded, his voice steady as he replied, "Change isn't easy, but it's necessary. And it starts with listening, learning, and doing the work." Marilyn added, "And it's ongoing. I've learned that redemption isn't a destination, it's a process." The ripple effect. The documentary sparked a national conversation about the stories that had been buried or forgotten. Schools began incorporating the contributions of marginalized groups into their curriculums. Veterans organizations pushed for greater recognition of black soldiers' achievements. For Alex, the journey wasn't over, but he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't expected. And for Marilyn, the experience had reshaped her life, giving her a mission to advocate for understanding and equality. As Alex returned home that evening, Eli ran up to him, holding a crayon drawing. "Look, Daddy, I drew you on the plane. You're a hero." Alex smiled, kneeling to hug his son. "Not a hero, buddy, just someone trying to do the right thing." A call to action. The weeks following the release of the documentary, Beyond the Skies, were a whirlwind for both Sergeant Alex Carter and Marilyn Foster. The film had struck a chord, reaching audiences far beyond what they had imagined. Social media was alight with discussions, not just about the incident on the plane, but about systemic issues that had persisted for generations. Alex found himself inundated with invitations to speak at schools, veterans events, and even government hearings. While humbled, he also felt the strain of balancing his newfound role as a public advocate with his responsibilities at home. Leah, always his anchor, noticed his exhaustion one evening as he prepared for yet another panel discussion. "You don't have to do it all, Alex," she said softly, handing him a cup of tea. "You've already done so much." Alex sat down, his shoulders slumping. "I know, but it feels like if I stop now, all of this momentum could fade away. People are finally paying attention, Leah. I can't let that slip." Leah placed a reassuring hand on his. "Then take it one step at a time. You don't have to change the world in a day." Marilyn's new path. For Marilyn Foster, the journey was even more complex. While the documentary had softened some public opinion toward her, there were still many who doubted her sincerity. She had thrown herself into volunteer work and public speaking, sharing her story and advocating for education about racial equity. Yet, every time she took the stage, she felt the weight of scrutiny. One evening, Marilyn attended a community forum in her hometown. The room was filled with people of all ages and backgrounds, many of whom were there out of curiosity or skepticism. When it was her turn to speak, Marilyn stood at the podium, clutching a small weathered notebook, her grandfather's war journal. "Before the plane incident," she began, her voice steady but quiet, "I thought I understood the world. I thought I understood my place in it. But I was wrong. I carried assumptions and biases I didn't even realize I had." She opened the journal, her fingers tracing the yellowed pages. "My grandfather, Charles Foster, served in World War I. He wrote about the bravery of his fellow soldiers, many of whom were black. He called them his brothers, said they taught him what true courage looked like. And yet, here I was, dishonoring that legacy." The room fell silent as she read an excerpt from the journal. When she finished, a young black woman in the audience stood up. "Do you really believe you can change?" the woman asked, her tone skeptical but not hostile. Marilyn met her gaze. "I don't know if I'll ever fully redeem myself in everyone's eyes. But I know I can try, and I can use my privilege to make sure others don't repeat my mistakes." The woman nodded slowly, her expression softening. "Then keep trying." A push for recognition. As public interest in the 761st Tank Battalion grew, veterans organizations and advocacy groups began lobbying for formal recognition of the unit's contributions. The documentary had shed light on the systemic racism that had denied these soldiers the honors they deserved, and the pressure was mounting on the Department of Defense to act. Alex was invited to testify before a congressional committee examining racial disparities in military awards. The hearing was a historic event, with lawmakers, historians, and veterans advocates coming together to discuss the legacy of discrimination in the armed forces. When it was Alex's turn to speak, he felt the weight of history on his shoulders. The soldiers of the 761st Tank Battalion didn't just fight for their country. Alex said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. They fought for a vision of America that didn't yet exist, a vision of equality, dignity, and respect. We owe it to them, and to every soldier who has faced discrimination, to tell their stories and honor their sacrifices. His testimony was met with applause, and several lawmakers publicly committed to pushing for greater recognition of the battalion. A letter from the past. Amid the growing momentum, Alex received an unexpected package. Inside was a letter from the family of Sergeant Henry Lawson, one of the black soldiers featured in the documentary. The letter included an old photograph of Henry and Charles Foster standing side by side, their arms slung around each other in camaraderie. The note accompanying the photo read, "Dear Sergeant Carter, thank you for bringing my father's story to light. For years, his bravery was overlooked, but now the world is beginning to see the hero he was. Enclosed is a photograph of my father with Charles Foster. I hope it serves as a reminder that even in the darkest times, unity and brotherhood can shine through. Alex stared at the photograph for a long time, marveling at the connection between their families. He immediately reached out to Marilyn to share the news. When Marilyn saw the photo, tears filled her eyes. "It's like they're speaking to us," she said, telling us to keep going. The medal ceremony. Months later, after relentless advocacy and public pressure, the Department of Defense announced that it would posthumously award medals to the soldiers of the 761st Tank Battalion. The ceremony was scheduled to take place at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. On the day of the ceremony, Alex, Marilyn, Leah, and Eli arrived early. The room was filled with families of the soldiers, many clutching photographs and mementos. The air was heavy with emotion. When Alex took the stage to deliver his speech, he held the photograph of Henry Lawson and Charles Foster. "These men weren't just soldiers," Alex began. "They were fathers, brothers, and friends. They believed in a vision of America that was bigger than themselves. Today, we honor their sacrifices, but let this not be the end of the story. Let it be the beginning of a commitment to tell the full truth about our history." Marilyn followed, clutching her grandfather's journal. "For years, I lived in ignorance," she said. "But today, I stand here to honor the bravery of men like my grandfather and Sergeant Lawson. Their legacy is a call to action for all of us." As the medals were presented, the room erupted in applause. Tears flowed freely as families finally saw their loved ones receive the recognition they had long been denied. A legacy of change. The ceremony was just the beginning. The recognition of the 761st Tank Battalion sparked a broader movement to uncover and honor the stories of other marginalized groups in American history. Schools across the country began incorporating these stories into their curriculums, ensuring that future generations would learn the full truth of the past. For Alex, the journey had been transformative. He had gone from a man seeking to quietly return home to his family to a national symbol of resilience and advocacy. For Marilyn, the path to redemption was ongoing, but she had found purpose in her efforts to educate and inspire others. One evening, as Alex sat with Leah and Eli, he received a message from Marilyn. "Thank you for giving me the chance to change. Let's keep telling their stories." Alex smiled, setting his phone aside. The fight wasn't over, but he felt a deep sense of hope. Together, they were building a legacy that would endure far beyond a single plane ride. Building bridges. The medal ceremony, though monumental, was only one step in a larger journey. As Sergeant Alex Carter and Marilyn Foster reflected on the day's events, they both realized the ripple effect of their actions was far from over. Their shared experiences had planted seeds of change, but tending those seeds required persistence and courage. A national conversation. In the weeks following the ceremony, Alex's phone buzzed constantly. Messages poured in from veterans, historians, and everyday citizens, each sharing their gratitude or their own stories of discrimination and perseverance. One message stood out. It was from a teacher in Alabama named Jessica Green, who wrote, "Dear Sergeant Carter, your story inspired me to revamp my U.S. history curriculum. For too long, I taught from outdated textbooks that ignored the contributions of black soldiers and other marginalized groups. Because of you and the 761st Tank Battalion, my students are learning the truth. Thank you for giving us this gift." Alex shared the message with Leah, his heart swelling with pride. "This is why we keep going," he said. Leah smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's amazing how far this has reached. But remember, Alex, you're only one person. You don't have to do this alone." Her words gave Alex an idea. He began reaching out to veterans and community leaders across the country, forming a coalition dedicated to amplifying untold stories of heroism and resilience. They called it the Legacy Alliance, and its mission was simple: to ensure no soldier's story was forgotten, regardless of race, gender, or background. Marilyn's ongoing redemption. While Alex worked on building the Legacy Alliance, Marilyn focused on her personal transformation. She continued volunteering and speaking publicly, but she knew actions spoke louder than words. Inspired by her grandfather's journal, she began organizing workshops on racial equity, bringing together people from different walks of life to share their experiences and learn from one another. One of her first workshops was held in her hometown. Marilyn stood before a small but diverse group of attendees, her hands shaking slightly as she began. "I'm not an expert," she said, her voice quivering. "I'm just someone who made mistakes, big ones, but I'm here because I want to learn and grow, and I hope you'll join me." The discussion was raw and emotional, with participants sharing stories of prejudice, fear, and hope. By the end of the session, Marilyn felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced before. One attendee, an elderly black man named Henry Davis, approached her afterward. "You remind me of a woman I knew years ago," he said. "She was set in her ways, but she changed. You're proving it's never too late to grow." Marilyn blinked back tears. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." An unexpected partnership. As Alex and Marilyn pursued their respective paths, their lives continued to intersect. One day, Alex received a call from Cynthia Torres, the filmmaker behind the documentary. "We've been approached by a major streaming platform," Cynthia said. "They want to expand the documentary into a series, exploring other untold stories of marginalized soldiers and their families. I'd like you and Marilyn to co-host." Alex was taken aback. "Me? Co-host?" Cynthia chuckled. "Yes, you. You've already proven you're a powerful storyteller, and Marilyn's transformation adds a layer of perspective we can't ignore." Alex hesitated. "I'll have to think about it." Later that evening, he discussed the opportunity with Leah. "It's a big commitment," Alex said, "but imagine the stories we could bring to light." Leah nodded. "You've always said you wanted to make a difference. Maybe this is how." After much deliberation, Alex agreed to co-host the series. When he called Marilyn to share the news, she was stunned. "Are you sure you want to work with me on this?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Marilyn," Alex said, his tone firm but kind, "you've worked hard to change. And this isn't about you or me. It's about the stories we need to tell. Let's do it." The series, Unsung Heroes. Production for the series, titled Unsung Heroes, began shortly afterward. Each episode focused on a different story, from the Navajo code talkers of World War II to the women of the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, who ensured soldiers received their mail during the war. One episode delved deeper into the legacy of the 761st Tank Battalion. Alex and Marilyn traveled to historic battle sites in Europe, meeting with historians and the descendants of the soldiers. The experience was emotional, particularly for Marilyn, who continued to grapple with the weight of her grandfather's legacy. At one point, they visited a memorial in France dedicated to Allied soldiers. Marilyn placed a bouquet of flowers at the base of the monument, her voice trembling as she spoke. "This is for my grandfather," she said, "and for every soldier who fought, even when the world didn't fight for them." Alex stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "We honor them by telling their stories, and we won't stop." A lasting impact. The series premiered to critical acclaim, sparking renewed interest in the overlooked contributions of marginalized groups in history. Schools and universities incorporated the episodes into their curriculums, and the Legacy Alliance saw a surge in membership. For Alex and Marilyn, the journey was transformative. What began as a moment of conflict had evolved into a mission of unity and understanding. One evening, Alex received another message from Marilyn. "Thank you for believing I could change. You didn't have to, but you did. Let's keep doing the work." Alex replied simply, "Always." The fight for justice expands. Months after the success of the documentary series, Unsung Heroes, Sergeant Alex Carter and Marilyn Foster found themselves at the helm of a national movement. What began as a moment of humiliation and reflection had grown into a powerful call to action. The Legacy Alliance, founded by Alex, now had chapters across the United States, each dedicated to uncovering forgotten stories and pushing for systemic change. A new chapter. In early spring, Alex received an invitation from the Department of Defense to join a task force reviewing historical military records. The task force aimed to identify cases where soldiers had been denied recognition due to racial or gender biases. Though the invitation was an honor, Alex felt apprehensive. "This is important work," Leah said, sitting beside him at their kitchen table. "But it's also a lot of responsibility." "I know," Alex replied, his fingers tracing the edge of the invitation. "What if we find out that things were even worse than we imagined?" Leah placed her hand on his. "Then you'll do what you always do. You'll face it head-on." Uncovering hidden truths. Alex joined the task force, working alongside historians, military officials, and activists. The records they uncovered painted a sobering picture. Countless soldiers, particularly from marginalized communities, had been overlooked, their bravery erased from official narratives. One case hit especially close to home. The task force discovered documentation about a group of black soldiers during the Korean War who had successfully defended a strategic outpost but received no recognition. Their commanding officer had filed a report praising their heroism, but the report had been buried due to racial biases within the chain of command. Alex was determined to bring their story to light. "These men deserve more than a footnote in history," he said during a task force meeting. "We owe it to them to make this right." Marilyn's evolution. While Alex delved into the task force's work, Marilyn continued her journey of advocacy and education. She had become a regular speaker at schools and community events, using her platform to challenge others to confront their biases. But she still struggled with lingering doubts about whether her efforts were enough. One evening, Marilyn received a letter from a high school student named Tasha Walker, who attended one of her workshops. "Ms. Foster, thank you for sharing your story. My grandfather is a Korean War veteran, and he's always felt invisible because of the way black soldiers were treated. Hearing you talk about the importance of honoring their stories gave him hope. He said it's the first time he's felt seen. Thank you for helping him feel that way." Marilyn clutched the letter, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, she felt she was truly making a difference. The congressional hearing. The Legacy Alliance's efforts reached a pivotal moment when Congress announced a hearing to address systemic biases in military recognition. Alex was invited to testify, alongside other veterans and historians. The hearing was broadcast live, with millions tuning in. Alex sat at a long table, his military uniform pressed, and his demeanor calm but resolute. "Members of Congress," he began, his voice steady, "we stand here today because too many heroes have been forgotten. Too many acts of bravery have gone unacknowledged. This isn't just about correcting the past. It's about defining the values we hold as a nation." He shared stories from the task force's findings, including the Korean War outpost defense. These men risked everything for a country that didn't see them as equals, but they didn't fight for recognition. They fought for the ideals this nation promises. It's time we live up to those ideals. The hearing sparked bipartisan support for a new bill, the Valor Act, which aimed to review and rectify cases of overlooked military honors. The bill also proposed creating a permanent office to address systemic bias in military award processes, a surprise connection. As the hearing concluded, an elderly man approached Alex in the hallway. He wore a faded veteran's cap and carried a weathered photo in his hand. "Sergeant Carter," the man said, his voice trembling, "I wanted to thank you for what you're doing." Alex smiled warmly. "Thank you for your service, sir." The man handed Alex the photo. It was a black and white image of a young soldier standing beside a tank, his expression proud but weary. "That's me," the man said. "And that's Charles Foster, Marilyn's grandfather. We served together." Alex stared at the photo, speechless. You knew him. The man nodded. He was a good man, one of the best. He always talked about how he hoped his family would carry on his legacy. Alex's chest tightened. Thank you for sharing this. I'll make sure Marilyn sees it. When Alex showed the photo to Marilyn later that evening, she was overcome with emotion. It's like he's still speaking to us, she said softly, reminding us to keep going. The Valor Act's passage. Months later, the Valor Act passed with overwhelming support. The legislation mandated a review of military records dating back to World War II, with a focus on identifying cases of bias. It also funded educational programs to ensure that schools taught a more inclusive version of American military history. Alex, Marilyn, and the Legacy Alliance were invited to the bill signing ceremony at the White House. Standing beside the president, Alex felt a surge of pride, not for himself, but for the countless soldiers whose sacrifices were finally being acknowledged. A legacy reclaimed. The impact of the Valor Act was immediate. Medals and honors were posthumously awarded to dozens of soldiers, including the group of black soldiers from the Korean War. Their families received the medals in emotional ceremonies, finally seeing their loved ones recognized for their bravery. Marilyn continued to share her grandfather's story, now intertwined with those of other forgotten heroes. She became a vocal advocate for education reform, pushing for a more accurate portrayal of history in schools. As for Alex, he remained at the forefront of the Legacy Alliance, mentoring young veterans and ensuring their stories were preserved. One evening, as he sat with Leah and Eli, he received a message from a historian. Sergeant Carter, we've uncovered more records about the 761st Tank Battalion. Their contributions were even greater than we realized. Let's talk soon. Alex set the phone down, his heart swelling with determination. The work wasn't finished, but he was ready to keep fighting. The final reflection. Years later, Alex stood at a newly unveiled monument dedicated to the 761st Tank Battalion and other marginalized military units. Beside him stood Marilyn, Leah, Eli, and dozens of veterans and their families. As Alex looked at the monument, engraved with the names of forgotten heroes, he felt a deep sense of peace. We did it, he said quietly. Marilyn nodded. We did. And now their stories will live on. The monument wasn't just a tribute to the past. It was a beacon for the future, a reminder that every voice matters, and every story deserves to be told.